So Carlos Cardoso, straight to the point, is probably the first of a series of works that I've made as homages to role models and people that come from Mozambique and or South Africa and that I admire. Carlos Cardoso was an investigative journalist, born in Mozambique and studied in South Africa, and developed a very complex and full practice in investigative journalism. Probably at the time where investigative journalism was not exactly as well discussed and as well understood, or the value thereof, as it is today. And Carlos Cardoso was a revolutionary. He supported the independence of Mozambique, and after the independence, he joined the government in creating the first independent information agency, which he ran for a couple of years. And he was a very well-respected journalist in the southern African geopolitical region. He was also then ostracized by the Frelimo government and suffered a lot of censorship and imprisonment. And when he came out of prison, he was out of a job. And it's at this point that his life history, so to speak, becomes interesting to me, because he then started to invent and develop ways to practice journalism which were out of the box, as we say today. And one of the first things he did was invent a media cooperative, which in turn invented something called the Media Fax. Media Fax was in fact a newspaper that was transmitted every night via a fax machine in Maputo, a single fax machine. So people who were interested in reading his very well-equipped news bulletins would pay a subscription, and every night he would transmit to anybody who paid the subscription, and they could be individuals or they could be institutions. And so in that way, he broke the taboos of a local newspaper and started thinking of news as something that could be global. And he would also break the idea of censorship, because it was impossible to censor something that was coming out of his private fax machine. So after that, he goes on to invent the Metical, which is an email newspaper, and so on. But I got interested in Carlos Cardoso 10 years after he was assassinated. And he was assassinated in 2002 whilst he was doing probably one of his largest and most complex investigations in Mozambique about the financial corruption. In 2010, there's an article written by an ex-colleague of his in a South African newspaper in homage of Carlos Cardoso, which is on the wall, and it's called, it's on the wall in the exhibition, and it's called In Memory of Mozambican Media Legend, because that's what he was, like a legend amongst journalists and photographers. So that article, so that piece of news becomes the starting point for my project. And so I went about researching all about his life further than what I knew already. And even though I was really interested in him as a poet and him as a painter, because he was a cultural man, he operated on various levels, I became really fascinated with this technological invention of his, how to break the taboos of what news were like through a little fax machine. And I thought it was incredible that a man sitting in the poorest country, at the time Mozambique was considered the poorest country in the world, could be so fresh and inventive as to put together a project like this. And there are amazing stories about the director of the New York Times who comes to Mozambique just to see how he's working this whole project. So what I did, my difficulty then was, how do I manifest this into an artistic project? Because my language is visual and mostly three-dimensional. So I went about taking my old fax machine out of the cupboard at home and took it apart. Nobody bothered too much because we don't use faxes anymore. And analyzing the mechanics of how a fax machine works. So if you think of a fax machine, inside the basic mechanics are a set of rollers, like most printing devices, where the paper has to go through a pressing mechanism to print out. And that's what the sculptures are a result of. So as I was taking the machine apart, I was drawing, and as I was drawing, I was beginning to see sculptures. So in that way, it's a complex project about him, about his media fax invention, and then it also deals with a memory of the space where he was assassinated in Maputo, by the documentation of that space, and remembering his famous lines about, we cannot shackle words. If we're in the pursuit of truth, you cannot shackle words. And of course, in Africa, shackles are a long history of, so that's what the project is about. My work is always political, but it's always political in a very particular way. So it will often point to something without actually being pamphleteering. And of course, when we are talking in 2019 at a world where we don't even know what truth is anymore, and where we have to question truth. And we have to question truth in a very particular way, because we always question truth. If you think about it, during the dictatorship in Portugal, we also knew they lied to us all the time, And if you lived in the GDR, people also, the newspapers also lied. So the idea of truth is always a complex one in a political sense. But today it's gained another few levels of complexity. And the levels of complexity are precisely to do with information and how information about us, for example, is gathered and compiled. So when I take somebody who was so profoundly interested in information and who saw himself as duty to uncover truth and to follow truth until death, I find it very easy today to see that as a starting point for starting to think of the political issues of truth and information today. But there's another level of political intention here in this project, which I don't often speak about openly, or because it's not specifically about this project, but it's about the tribute. And it's about the tribute to African role models. So Africans have very few role models. Most role models are Western constructed. And to me, it's very important to stop and think of, and the reason why we don't have role models is because sometimes we do not know how to construct role models. So Nelson Mandela and so on, easy, But when you're talking about somebody who's been dead for 20 years and is almost forgotten, there's a role model. That's somebody I admire. I think of Carlos Cardoso as I still get goosebumps, So in that way, it's a very political project as well,
El proyecto que presentamos aquí en Galería Pelaires, en la Avenida del Arte, es un proyecto, una exposición a solo de Ângela Ferreira. Ângela es una súper importante artista portuguesa y es una artista muy relevante con un trabajo súper político y súper relevante en los días de hoy. Y el proyecto que presentamos es un proyecto ya de 2011 sobre un periodista que es Carlos Cardoso. Y Carlos Cardoso ha sido un importante periodista mozambicano que ha sido asesinado en 2002. Y lo que Ângela hace aquí es pensar un poco eso, ¿no? Es pensar cómo una figura tan relevante se queda olvidada hoy. Y es pensar cómo un periodista en un país muy pobre empezó haciendo un periodismo de investigación y cómo lo difundía y la manera que encontró para difundirlo a través del fax. Y las esculturas que presenta Ângela aquí son como un pensamiento de la propia máquina del fax y cómo esos mecanismos se pueden ser mecanismos transmisores y transmisores de la idea de verdad, que era lo que Carlos Cardoso investigaba con todos los crímenes financieros que asolaban Mozambique en los años 80 con la entrada del FMI y de mucho dinero que entraba para ayudar el país. Y ha habido muchos casos de corrupción. Y como eso ha sido asesinado. Y por ahí, con un artículo en un importante periódico de Sudáfrica, hay una noticia señalando los 10 años de la muerte de Carlos Cardoso. Y por ahí Ângela empezó a pensar nuevamente en la figura, porque lo conoció cuando estudiaba en África del Sur. Ângela es mozambicana, nacida en Mozambique, hace su formación académica en Sudáfrica y se viene después a Lisboa, a vivir en Lisboa en los años 90. Por eso tiene una conexión con África, es africana. Y para ella es importante pensar los modelos africanos, de por qué no tenemos tantos modelos africanos en el mundo. Y esta es la memoria también que Ângela pretende traer con esta expo que presentamos ahora aquí en Palma.